Naomi moves around her kitchen, trying to fix herself some breakfast, but she just couldn't do anything properly. All her movements were sloppy, and nothing seemed to work. She was surely hungry, but she was just too anxious and unsettled. She kept staring at her phone, expecting a call with the good news she had been anticipating for months now. Lately, it had been getting harder to do things. She didn't even enjoy her own cooking anymore. She had been eating out a lot, and although she tried to go for fresh, healthy foods in the restaurants, she knew it would be best to eat home-cooked meals. Naomi did plan to hire help to assist her, but that plan had been on hold because she wanted to do that in her next location. Her things were already packed, and she planned to move far away, so it would be useless to hire someone here. Only one thing was stopping her, and she was desperately hoping it would get done quickly. Her phone rang, and she quickly answered, feeling a little anxious. Her lawyer's voice came through. "Madam, they are still insisting that you come here personally. I have tried every way possible to convince them but failed," he explained. Naomi was so devastated by the news. This had been going on for months. She didn't understand why those people wanted her present for the divorce signing. She wasn't even asking for anything from them. She just wanted to be free, to leave the past behind her and start a new life. Was that so hard? This was the fourth time Adam had refused to sign the divorce papers. She had exhausted all her excuses for not showing up at this point. She was still speaking to her lawyer when there were some forceful sounds, like someone was pulling his phone away. She confirmed it right after hearing her mother-in-law's voice. "Listen, you ungrateful girl," she shouted. "I don't know what you're up to, but I know you're trying to trap my son in some way. If you want this divorce so bad, come here and show yourself. I don't know what trick you're up to, but I won't let my son fall for it again. Come here right now," she commanded. Naomi was enraged. For 3 years, she had endured so many insults and so much mistreatment from this old woman, her daughter, her desired daughter-in-law, and anyone they had managed to instigate against her. She had allowed it all because she was married to her son, but right now, she wanted nothing more than to stay out of that marriage. Still dressed in her oversized, simple, loose clothes, Naomi didn't care. She grabbed her tote bag, got into a taxi, and headed for the Miller's company, where her lawyer was supposed to meet them. When she arrived and walked right in, many people had looks of utter shock on their faces. All the employees couldn't believe their eyes. Wasn't this their boss's wife? Naomi ignored all of them and went straight into the elevator that took her to the small boardroom she knew they were in. She pushed the door forcefully and stepped in. Everyone was shocked to their core on seeing her. All mouths hung open. Adam, dressed in his signature tailor-made suit. His mother sitting next to him. Stacy, the supposed love of his life. His sister, Mabel. His lawyers. All of them were seated around the large boardroom table. Her own lawyer was there as well, a kind, middle-aged man who had been trying his best to help her. It seemed like the whole family had gathered to gang up against her. But Naomi ignored their shocked faces and went to sit right next to her lawyer. She was so bold, she didn't even know she had it in her. "Let's get this done. I have already signed the divorce papers. Your condition was that I be present. I am here now. So sign it," Naomi said seriously, looking at Adam, who was still very shocked. He maintained his firm facial expression, but his surprise was still visible. His lawyer spoke up professionally. "Madam, why didn't you tell us about your condition? This changes a lot of things in the divorce proceedings," he pointed out. Naomi spoke up immediately. "It does not change anything. I'm sure your client knows that very well," she said, looking at Adam. "I knew it. I knew you were up to something," his mother burst out. "Is this why you've been hiding from us? You even acted all righteous, saying you don't want anything out of this divorce, but I know why now. You want to gain public pity. It would make the headlines. The Miller's daughter-in-law divorced and left with nothing, even though she is pregnant. You want to bring a bad name to my family, right?" "An innocent young woman kicked out of the Grand Miller's family," the old woman ranted angrily. Naomi just ignored her. She didn't have time for this old woman today. "So you don't want a divorce settlement because you have your eyes on lifelong hefty child support that you plan to get by pinning that bastard you're carrying on my son?" she spat. Naomi's mood immediately changed. Listen, Rebecca, she said, calling her mother-in-law by name for the very first time. Watch your tongue. Don't ever call my child a bastard, okay? I am warning you. Last time I checked, no one knows the fathers of your own children. She spat in a very serious tone. Rebecca, Mabel, and Stacy were all taken aback. They'd bullied Naomi for years, and she had never been the type to retaliate. Mabel and Stacy angrily warned Naomi not to talk to Rebecca that way, thinking she would keep quiet, but she told them off as well, silencing them. I always knew you were a vile woman acting all innocent, Rebecca accused. You're right. You haven't seen anything. I am capable of crazier things, and I am not afraid of you. Don't you try me, Naomi warned again. Rebecca was so shocked. Adam, didn't you see that? Are you just going to sit there and allow this woman to insult me? She shouted at her son. Adam was still quietly observing Naomi's audacious stand. This was not the Naomi he knew. She was so different, even more attractive. And what can your son do? Tell me, what's the worst he can do? Divorce me? Well, guess why we are here, woman. That's all I want. A divorce, so I can be free from anything that ties me to your useless family. Naomi barked. She knew Adam wouldn't say anything he never did. Adam, sign the papers, please. This place is not good for my health. I need to leave, Naomi added. Adam didn't know how to go about this. He had agreed with his mother's plan to have Naomi be physically present for the divorce finalization because he just didn't agree with her idea of getting nothing from him. She would need some money to start over, and he had hoped to convince her to take some. Seeing her pregnant was a real shock. Now he understood why she had left his house so suddenly. Maybe she was with a man who was able to provide for her and their child, a man who stood up for her, something he had never done. He needed to free her from this torturous marriage they had both endured for 3 years. It had been an arranged marriage, and his grandfather, the person who arranged it, was no more. There was no reason to keep suffering. Are you sure you don't want anything? It could help take care of you and your child, Adam suggested. This enraged Rebecca, but before she could say anything, Naomi spoke up. The only thing I want from you is your signature on those papers, she said firmly. Adam just nodded. He picked up a pen and opened the divorce papers. Just as he was about to sign them, the door was pushed open and Peter, his driver, rushed in. Sir, there is something very important I need to tell you, he said urgently. Adam looked up to see that Peter seemed very serious, like something was really wrong. He asked if everything was okay, to which Peter quickly said no. It was urgent. Listen, you fool. Don't you dare talk to my Adam like you two are mates. What exactly is this urgent thing that a simple driver needs to talk about? And how dare you barge in here? Stacy warned. Peter, I hope everything is okay. Is anyone in danger or something? Naomi asked, worried. Madam, you don't need to worry. No one is in danger, Peter reassured her. Naomi had always had a good relationship with the staff in the house. They were the only ones kind to her and her only friends in the Miller household. Okay, if it isn't that kind of urgency, can he just sign the divorce papers in a few seconds? I really need to get going, Naomi suggested. But Peter opposed this idea way too fast. Sir, please don't sign those papers. Just come with me, please, he insisted. Everyone was surprised at this point. Adam decided to go out with Peter, knowing he wouldn't have interrupted him that way unless it was truly important. Peter seemed to really insist that he shouldn't sign the papers. Adam had already been hesitant to sign them prior to that, and he didn't even understand why. It was like he was looking for a reason not to sign. Rebecca tried to follow along, but Adam politely told her to wait. He'd be back soon. Peter led Adam to his office, where Mariah, their maid, was waiting urgently. Actually, Peter had seen Naomi walk into the company earlier, and he was very shocked to find out she was pregnant. He had wanted to stop her, but she seemed too serious, and he figured he'd just meet her later since he was heading back to the house briefly to pick something for the boss. At the house, he happened to mention to Mariah that he had seen Naomi and that she was pregnant. On hearing this, Mariah insisted that Peter bring her to Adam immediately. Maria then explained an incident that happened in the house some months ago. Adam had always been a very depressed person. He was never really happy. He had a robotic, sad life. He was either in the office working or at home at night, struggling to sleep, and he had a horrible drinking habit. Naomi had made it a routine of hers to always take some painkillers and a cup of water for him whenever he showed up drunk. She'd sneak them onto his bedside table. Adam remembered always finding headache pills there. He never knew it was Naomi doing that. He hadn't even cared to ask who placed them there. He'd just take them. No wonder he hadn't been finding any ever since she left. Maria explained that Naomi would always sneak into his room to place the painkillers and sneak out quietly, making sure no one saw her. But one night, she went in and didn't come out as fast. When she finally did, her clothes were a mess, and she was crying. In her state, it wasn't hard to figure out what had really happened there. Maria had witnessed the whole thing secretly. After Maria confessed this to Adam, she said she was sure the child Naomi was carrying was fathered by Adam himself. She just wanted him to confirm it before making any drastic decisions. Adam was so taken aback by the news. If this was true, it meant he had likely violated his wife against her will. This couldn't be right. He didn't recall a single thing. He would never be able to forgive himself. This kind of explained why Naomi had suddenly left the house. She must think he's a monster. Maybe she was repulsed by him now. How could he do that? It couldn't be true, right? Adam slowly walked back into the boardroom where everyone was waiting, his face ashen. His eyes were right on Naomi the moment he stepped in, and he kept staring at her up until he sat down. But not necessarily at her face. His eyes were fixed on her baby bump. Everyone wondered why he was acting that way. The women didn't like this at all. Stacy was enraged, but she didn't say anything. Naomi didn't understand why he was staring at her like that. She wondered what Peter could have told him. She just hoped whatever it was wouldn't affect their divorce. Son, sign the papers now. That silly boy distracted you at the wrong time. Come on, quickly sign them, Rebecca urged. But Adam didn't say anything to her. He was so serious. How far along are you? He asked after a long stretch of silence, catching Naomi off guard. You don't have the right to ask me that question. Let's just concentrate on what brought us here, please, she snapped. Adam didn't flinch. He just kept staring. Is it my child? He asked, shocking everyone. Naomi almost lost her breath. She felt guilty for a few seconds before quickly recovering. What kind of stupid question is that? You, more than anyone, know this isn't your child. We have never been intimate before. Naomi shouted, her senses on high alert. She didn't understand why he was asking these weird questions all of a sudden. Rebecca, Stacy, and Mabel were overjoyed when they heard Naomi say she and Adam had never been intimate before. This was great news to them. I'll sign the divorce papers, only on the condition that you prove to me that I'm not the father of the child, Adam declared, shocking everyone yet again. Naomi was raging mad by now. She couldn't believe his audacity. What exactly was going on here? All she wanted was to leave this pointless marriage behind her. Why was he making it so hard? Adam always listened to his mother. For years, Naomi had wished he'd just stand up to her and make a choice of his own. How come he was being resistant the one time she actually hoped he'd listen to his mother and give her this divorce? Naomi angrily spoke up. Do you see that, Stacy? Seems like your man so badly wants to stay married to me. Speak to him, because this is just embarrassing for both of you. Naomi spat angrily and stomped out. She was way too hungry for all of this. Whether she got this divorce or not, she was leaving. He could keep this marriage if he so pleased. Naomi had been raised by her father, and he had left her some money that she hadn't used before. So she took part of it and bought a small house in a different city. She would start life anew with her child. The plan was to use her savings to sustain them for a few years and find a job when her child was grown enough. Either way, it was going to be only them. Back at the Miller house, the environment was just too tense. Rebecca was enraged. This was the first time Adam had gone against her wishes, and it was about such a serious matter. He had ignored her in front of so many people, and he had allowed Naomi to insult her. Adam, call the lawyers right now and sign those papers, she shouted. But Adam just sat quietly. Rebecca, Mabel, Stacy, and some of his uncles and cousins were all against his decision. These people had never liked Naomi because she was from a middle-class family. They wanted Adam to marry Stacy, the daughter of one of the Miller Corporation's investors, while Naomi's late father had only been a simple employee in the company. The Miller Company was started by Adam's grandfather, a very hardworking man. He was the one who arranged the marriage between Naomi and Adam. Now that he was no longer alive, nothing stopped them from breaking this marriage. Rebecca never allowed Adam and Naomi to have a real marriage. She never let them live peacefully. She was fully involved in their relationship. And considering how overworked Adam was at the company, he didn't have time for anything. Adam was the CEO of the company. The Miller family was very large, and many men and women benefited from the profits generated by the company. It was their sole means of living, but they didn't want to put in the hard work. In fact, they had absolutely no knowledge of how to run the company. All the uncles, aunts, and cousins just waited to get their share of the profits at the end of the month while Adam drained himself doing most of the work. He was always exhausted, but no one appreciated it. He didn't even have his own freedom. "Mother, she is carrying my child, and I am going to be there in my child's life. Nothing will change my mind," Adam affirmed. "Adam, that is not your child. Even if it is, you don't need to be married to her. You two can co-parent," Stacy suggested. She had been waiting to marry Adam for years. He had never shown any interest in her, but she didn't care. Adam was controlled by his mother, and his mother loved her. Stacy believed that as long as Adam married her, he would eventually be forced to love her. "You and I can get married. Trust me, I don't mind if you have a child," she added. "You don't get it. I don't want to co-parent. I will do everything in my power to make sure my child gets the life I never got. They will grow up with both their parents. It will be a happy home," Adam affirmed. Rebecca suddenly became emotional. "Adam, I did my best to give you the kind of life other children could only dream of. Are you really saying you didn't grow up in a happy home? You don't appreciate any of my efforts?" she cried out. "I did my best as a mother. I gave you everything. I didn't give you a father, but I loved you. I raised you on my own. I chose you, Adam. I chose you out of so many children, yet you disregard me like this," she cried. "Mother, why exactly did you choose me? Why not any of the other kids in the orphanage?" he asked. Rebecca suddenly faked some emotion. "Because I love you. Just one look at you, and I knew you were the one for me. We all love you. This whole family loves you. I know I didn't give you a father, but you have a full family," she said. Adam just stared around, looking at all of them. The only one who had ever truly loved him in this family was his grandfather. His grandfather had adored him and knew Adam was the only family member who took his legacy and business seriously. The rest of his children and grandchildren were just after his money, not ready to work for it. "Mother, I'm not stupid. I know why you truly adopted me. I clearly remember you asking the headmistress whether I was truly the smartest boy in the orphanage. That was your requirement. You wanted the smartest kid. It was never about love. You adopted me because you wanted someone who would slave for your family, right?" Adam said, so seriously that the whole room fell silent. Rebecca was horrified. She didn't even know what to say. She had done her best to control Adam for years to avoid something like this ever happening. She started dramatically crying, blaming Adam for disrespecting her after all she had done for him. All his uncles were reprimanding him as well. The atmosphere was intense. But Adam maintained his stand. When he was just a little boy, he had made a promise to himself his children would never have the kind of life he had. And he was determined to keep that promise. To everyone's horror, he declared that while he was grateful for everything this family had done for him, he had paid his dues, working for them like a slave, and he was done. He said they were even now. He didn't want anything from them except what truly belonged to him, his freedom. Adam was determined to start life all over again, but on his own terms this time. The Millers were all left shocked. Some who knew Adam's value tried to convince him to change his mind, while the more ungrateful ones ordered him to leave penniless, like he had come. But Adam had no issues with that. All the luxury clothes, the watches, the gadgets, the cars, everything he had, he owed to the Millers. He had been overworked for years, and Rebecca had always been following him around, controlling his life. He had never had a chance to do anything for himself. He had no other avenues to make money. But not anymore. The only good thing that had come out of all this was the genuine friends he had managed to make.
So he went to them.
He didn't even have money for food or anything, but he didn't mind. Rebecca did not try to stop him, thinking he'd probably realize he was making a mistake and come running back to beg her. Adam stayed with his friend for some days, trying to think of a way forward. Luckily for him, growing up in a wealthy family meant he went to the best schools, and being a CEO at the Miller Corporation for years meant he made some good connections with elites. His friends were men of reputation and power. He was able to find Naomi's new address and was just so happy to go get his wife and child back. He still didn't know what he had done to Naomi in his drunk state, but he had decided to do everything possible to make it up to her. He was already attached to the child she was carrying. Naomi's reaction when he asked her about it had been a clear giveaway, and he had no plans of leaving them. Naomi was still trying to adapt to the new house and neighborhood. It wasn't easy at all. She was all alone, and this whole change was rather uncomfortable. She was in a vulnerable state, and staying alone was really risky. Anything could happen, and she would need assistance. Being in a new place where people barely knew her wasn't a good look either. Naomi had so many cravings, and she really hated her own cooking. The aroma of the meals put her off. She'd lose interest in the meals she prepared right after she was done cooking. She had been contacting a house management agency for a maid, and they said they'd send one over today. She just hoped it would be a really helpful and understanding person. Her doorbell rang, and she was kind of delighted. She slowly hoisted herself up and pulled the door open. Her smile slowly disappeared. What were the chances? What are you doing here? How did you find this place? Are you stalking me? She shouted, her anger spilling over in a flood of questions. Hey, madam, don't shout. It's not good for your blood pressure in your state. You need to cool down, please. Besides, I'm just as shocked to see you here. The agency sent me to a random client, Adam explained. Naomi was so shocked. She just stared in disbelief. Hadn't it only been like 4 days? How come Adam looked like a completely different person? Why was he in casual clothes? Why was he saying weird things and smiling so easily? It wasn't like they were ever friends, so why was he even here? Before Naomi could voice any of these questions, Adam made his way into the house, saying he'd go find his room. Once Naomi recovered from her state of shock, she went to get her phone and called the agency to confirm whether, in some twisted way, this all added up. There had to be a reason. How did Adam even know about the agency? She had never mentioned it to him. To her utter horror, they confirmed it. They actually said they had already sent her a house help and mentioned his name. Naomi was losing it. Are you people crazy? You actually sent a poor, helpless, pregnant, innocent woman a male stranger to live with her? How evil are you people, she shouted. We're so sorry, ma'am, but he's a very skilled young man. We have so many good reviews from clients about him. He's one of our best. You should consider yourself lucky, ma'am. Naomi was flabbergasted by their blatant lie. Adam? An employee at their agency? What kind of silly prank was this? They even rejected her appeal for a different house help. These people were crazy. One thing was for sure. Adam must have flashed his money and power around to bribe these people.
But why?
Something wasn't adding up. Adam was definitely up to something. Rebecca must have convinced him to play along with one of her sinister plans. Naomi wanted nothing to do with that family, ever. She headed out to look for Adam in order to send him away immediately. There was no way he was staying here for even a second. Naomi walked out of her bedroom and was immediately hit by an aroma that made her mouth water. Her nerves instantly calmed, her mind shifting to the actual food. She walked directly to the kitchen and froze at the sight before her. Adam was in the kitchen, moving with practiced ease. He flipped pancakes with one hand while stirring something in a pot with the other. A tray of golden brown pastries cooled on the counter, and fresh-cut fruit gleamed in a glass bowl. He turned off the stove, then began plating everything: fluffy scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, perfectly toasted bread, with the precision of a chef. How long had she even been gone? How fast did he cook all this? She wondered to herself. Naomi's stomach growled loudly. She winced, placing a hand on her belly, and almost immediately felt a strong kick. Even the baby approved of whatever magic was happening in this kitchen. Adam didn't even look startled. He calmly set the last plate on the table and began arranging it like it was some fancy restaurant. Polished silverware, folded napkins, a fresh flower in a small vase. Only then did he glance up and notice her. His face softened with a warm smile. "Hello, sunshine," he said, walking over with that infuriating gentleness she found so perfect and annoying. "Hope you're hungry because I've already started work." Before she could answer, he was already by her side, taking her hand. "Come on, let's get you seated." She tried to resist, but she was already being guided to the chair, his hands steadying her as she eased down with a grateful sigh. He adjusted the cushion behind her back and brushed a stray curl from her face with such tenderness that her heart stuttered. He served her without a word, a perfect portion of everything on the table, then stepped back and stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back like a proper butler waiting for orders. Naomi stared at the plate. The food smelled divine. It looked divine. Her stomach growled again, and with one last glare at Adam, she picked up her fork. The first bite melted on her tongue. She closed her eyes, savoring the mix of flavors. The next bite was even better. Before she knew it, she was eating like a woman starved, alternating between glaring at Adam and shoveling food into her mouth. Every time her plate neared empty, he was there, silently refilling it without being asked, like he could sense exactly when she wanted more. She tried to hold on to her annoyance. She really did. But it was hard when the food was this good. Finally, between bites of perfectly crisp bacon, she managed to spit out, "Just because I'm eating doesn't mean you get to stay here." "Of course not," Adam said smoothly, already placing more pancakes on her plate. Naomi's glare hardened into something dangerous. And Adam, watching her with quiet satisfaction, knew exactly what he was doing. Naomi ate the food gratefully, every bite filling her with warmth and satisfaction. She tried to stay mad, she really did, but it was hard when the food was this good. Still, she kept sneaking suspicious glances at Adam, who stood respectfully beside her like some professional butler, hands clasped behind his back. After a long silence, Adam finally spoke. Madam, I've realized your kitchen is rather empty," he said with a gentle smile. "I'd really like to restock it with a lot of healthy food. You need to be fed well, and I'm going to make sure of that. So, I'd like some money to go do some shopping." Naomi froze mid-bite, her fork halfway to her mouth. She slowly turned to face him, staring at him like he'd just grown a second head. "I'm sorry, what?" Adam's smile didn't waver. "Some money for shopping. For healthy food." She blinked. Adam? Asking for money? Adam, the same man who was literally a millionaire, was standing there, posing as a housekeeper and now begging for money? "What exactly is going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Adam's eyes softened as they flicked briefly to her baby bump. "I'm not up to anything," he said gently. "I just want to take good care of you." His voice dropped, filled with a quiet sincerity. "It's my job." That last part sent a strange shiver through her. There was something deeper in those words, something she couldn't quite figure out. She kept glaring at him, even as she chewed her food, trying to keep her guard up. "There will be no need for you to do that," she said firmly, washing down the food with the delicious juice he'd somehow managed to make. She hated to admit it, but the man was incredible in the kitchen. "You're leaving. Right now." "Madam, please," Adam said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "You can't send me out. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't know anyone in this town, and I can't afford accommodation." Naomi almost spat out her juice. She coughed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What the heck is going on here?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. But when she looked at Adam, he only smiled softly, like nothing was out of the ordinary. She sighed heavily, rubbing her temple. He was definitely messing with her. There was no other explanation. "You can go to your sweet mother," she snapped, "or your mansion. I don't care. Stop messing with me. Please don't strain yourself. Adam said calmly, his tone gentle as if she hadn't just yelled at him. Just eat your food. We can talk about this later. Let me go unpack my bag before heading to the grocery store, okay? And just like that, he turned and walked away, completely ignoring her demand for him to leave. Naomi just sat there, stunned, watching him disappear down the hallway. What exactly is even going on here? She whispered again, staring after him like she'd just stepped into some strange alternate reality. Her hand drifted to her belly, where the baby gave another soft kick, almost like they were enjoying the drama. You're not helping, she muttered at her bump. But even as she sat there, confused and fuming, she reached for another piece of toast. Because, well, the food really was that good. Naomi leaned back in her chair, fully satisfied and more content than she'd been in a long time. She had to admit, even if only to herself, that this was the best breakfast she'd had in, well, maybe ever. Every bite had been perfect, and now the warm fullness in her belly made her feel relaxed, even sleepy. The baby gave a soft little kick, as if in agreement.
But there was no time for that.
She pushed back from the table, stood up with a stretch, and made her way to her bedroom. Adam was right, the kitchen did need restocking. And it wasn't just the kitchen. This was a new house, and there were still so many things she hadn't gotten around to buying. She'd gone to the market a few days ago, but she hadn't managed to buy much. Carrying heavy bags around while 7 months pregnant wasn't exactly easy. If Adam wanted to help so badly, she might as well use him. At least for today. Then she'd send him packing. Grabbing her bag, she slung it over her shoulder and walked out. She found Adam already waiting in the living room, standing near the door with that same calm, collected air, like he'd always belonged there. Are you headed somewhere? He asked, his voice light but curious. Yes, she said briskly. I'm going to the market. With you. Adam's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you sure? You just ate. Shouldn't you rest up a bit? His voice softened with concern. I can go on my own. I'll be back in no time. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She didn't like how easily he was slipping into this role, like he actually belonged here, taking care of her. You make it sound like I want you back here, she snapped. I'm going with you, and I can take care of myself. I've been doing it for 7 months now. I don't need your help. That last part was a lie, of course. She did need his help, or at least his muscles, for carrying groceries. But there was no way she'd admit that out loud. Adam didn't argue. He just nodded, that infuriatingly gentle smile still on his face, and opened the door for her. They walked in silence down the street, the air warm and filled with the distant sounds of everyday life. Cars, children playing, the hum of conversation. Naomi kept sneaking glances at him out of the corner of her eye. It was so strange. So wrong. This man, Adam Miller, was the CEO of Miller Corporation, one of the biggest companies in the country. He was Rebecca's golden boy, the apple of her eye, heir to a fortune most people couldn't even dream of. And here he was, dressed in casual clothes, walking down an ordinary street and about to help her buy groceries. What's more, when they stopped a taxi, he slid in beside her without hesitation, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Naomi's mind raced with suspicion. Something was definitely off, and she was going to figure out exactly what it was. The grocery store was bustling, filled with the sound of chatter, rustling bags, and the occasional cry of a child. Naomi walked ahead with purpose, her baby bump leading the way, while Adam followed closely behind, arms already burdened with bags. Get those apples, Naomi said, pointing without even looking back. Adam reached for them without a word, his movements smooth and practiced. He barely had time to set them in the cart before Naomi's voice called out again. And those oranges? No, not those ones. He obeyed, trailing behind her like an obedient houseboy. Every so often, he'd make a suggestion. Maybe we should get some. The glare she shot him could have frozen fire. Or not, Adam murmured, wisely falling silent. It didn't take long for other shoppers to take notice. To anyone observing, it looked like a classic case of a husband patiently enduring his pregnant wife's hormonal shopping spree. By the time they reached the checkout counter, their cart was overflowing. Naomi reached for her purse, and Adam stepped aside, standing politely like a man who had lived in poverty his whole life. He just waited quietly while she handled the bill. When they finally got back home, Naomi was completely exhausted. The moment she stepped inside, she flopped onto the couch with a heavy sigh, sinking into the cushions like she'd just run a marathon. Meanwhile, Adam worked without complaint, carrying the groceries inside in batches after offloading them from the taxi. He moved back and forth, his face calm and focused, making sure everything was neatly placed on the kitchen counter. Naomi watched him through half-lidded eyes, too tired to do much more than observe. And despite herself, she had to admit, there was something oddly comforting about seeing him move around her house like this. Like he belonged there. Finally, after bringing in the last of the bags, Adam stood in the doorway, brushing his hands off. Before he could speak, Naomi beat him to it. "Thank you so much," she said, yawning tiredly. "You can leave now." She didn't even open her eyes as she said it, just waved a lazy hand toward the door like she was dismissing a servant. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Adam's gentle voice broke it. "I'll just put the groceries away first. I need to do the dishes and prepare lunch for you as well. You look tired. Let me get you some water." Naomi's eyes snapped open, but before she could say a word, he was already heading into the kitchen. Naomi sat there, still sinking into the couch's softness. Adam walked back in, carrying a glass of water and a tall glass of fruit juice. Without a word, he placed them gently on the coffee table in front of her. "Stay hydrated," he said softly, his voice warm and calm. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back into the kitchen. Naomi just stared after him, completely thrown off balance. She reached for the water first, taking a long sip, and with every gulp, her body relaxed a little more. The juice followed soon after. The cool, sweet flavor washed over her, and she sighed in relief. And yet she couldn't relax. Not really. For a pregnant woman like her, having someone so considerate, so attentive, felt surprisingly good. But that didn't make the situation any less strange. Adam Miller, her husband in name only, had always been busy, too busy to even spend time with her when they were married. And his mother, Rebecca Miller, made no secret of her dislike for Naomi. There was no way that woman would ever allow her beloved son to stay here, taking care of her like a servant. None of this made sense. Frowning, Naomi grabbed her phone. If there was any explanation for why Adam was here, she'd find it. She hadn't checked the news in a while. Maybe she'd missed something important. And oh, she had. Her eyes widened as she stared at the headline. Adam Miller cuts ties with the Millers, steps down as CEO, and walks away from fortune. Her breath caught, and with shaky fingers, she tapped the article. The more she read, the more her shock grew. Adam Miller, the man everyone believed was the perfect heir to the Miller empire, was adopted. Naomi couldn't believe it. Rebecca had always treated him like her own flesh and blood. No one had ever suspected otherwise. But the real bombshell was what came next. Adam had resigned as CEO of Miller Corporation and severed all ties with the family. And, the most shocking part? He hadn't taken a single thing with him. No money. No property. Nothing. He'd walked away from billions without a second thought. The article didn't give any reasons, and the source was anonymous, but the comments were wild. How could he be so ungrateful? Millions of orphans would kill for the life he had. Others said, he must have had a good reason. You don't walk away from that kind of wealth unless something serious happened. The Millers hadn't said anything about it either, and Adam hadn't spoken publicly. Apparently, no one knew where he was. No one except her. Because right now, Adam Miller was in her kitchen, quietly putting away groceries like he belonged there. Naomi was so disturbed, she wondered what could have happened. She was sure their divorce had something to do with this. Maybe Adam going against his mother and refusing to divorce her had caused them to kick him out of the family. But that didn't make sense either. If that was the case, why was Adam here, carrying her groceries, when he could just ask her for a divorce? Naomi was oddly quiet while having her lunch. Adam had gone all out again, but she was no longer in the mood. Her mind was filled with too many thoughts. The lunch table was a feast, filled with colorful, mouth-watering dishes, each one more appetizing than the next. The air smelled of perfectly cooked spices and fresh ingredients, and Naomi couldn't deny it. The man knew his way around a kitchen. But despite the beautiful spread, Naomi's mood was heavy. She sat quietly, pushing a few pieces of food around her plate, lost in thought. Adam noticed right away. He sat across from her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes full of concern. "I hope everything's okay. Is there something wrong with the food?" he asked softly. Naomi looked up, startled. She hadn't realized how quiet she'd been. "The food's fine," she said quickly, trying to sound normal. "I didn't know you could cook like this." Adam smiled, though he clearly wasn't fooled by her attempt to brush off whatever was bothering her. "I can. I learned to do all the house chores when I was a kid," he said simply, his voice calm. Naomi just nodded, her mind still turning over everything she'd read earlier. She kept stealing glances at him, trying to figure out what he was really up to. The man who used to be too busy for her was now sitting across the table, making meals and taking care of her like it was the most natural thing in the world. And now, knowing what she knew, that he'd walked away from everything, she couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Adam, meanwhile, kept his eyes drifting back to her baby bump. His gaze softened every time he looked at it, a mix of wonder and fear in his expression. He didn't remember the night that had led to this pregnancy. The memories were lost in a haze of alcohol, something he had drowned himself in far too often back then. But even if the details were blurry, one thing was clear. He believed Maria's story, believed the child was his. And Naomi had never denied it. Still, he understood why she kept her guard up. After everything that had happened between them, her wariness made perfect sense. Maybe she just didn't want to be alone with him in this house, and honestly, he couldn't blame her. The silence stretched until Adam finally spoke again, his voice low and apologetic. "Naomi,
I'm really sorry.
I never meant for any of this to happen. I don't know what I did. I don't remember. I was drunk and I don't want to talk about it." Naomi cut him off sharply, her voice tight. Adam immediately fell silent, nodding in understanding. He wouldn't push. Not about this. The quiet settled again, only the soft clink of cutlery filling the space. After a while, Naomi took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but determined. "You can stay," she said, her eyes locked on her plate. "For as long as I agree to keep you around. But I'm not paying you." When she finally looked up, she was met with the brightest smile she'd ever seen on Adam's face, like she'd just offered him the world. "Thank you," he said softly, and for a moment, he looked like a man who'd been given a second chance. Naomi sat there, watching Adam with a mix of emotions she couldn't even begin to untangle. The warmth of the meal he'd prepared still lingered, but her thoughts had drifted far from the present. She stared at him, trying and failing to figure this man out.
He was so different now.
Calm, attentive, thoughtful. It didn't add up. And the more she thought about it, the more her own guilt resurfaced. The same guilt she'd been carrying since that night. That night, everything changed. It had been like any other night back then. Adam had come home late, drunk, as he often was. Naomi had gotten used to it, the quiet sadness that always seemed to hang over him. Their marriage had never been real, just an arrangement between them. They'd spent 3 years living like strangers, and Naomi had learned to stop expecting anything from him. But she still cared.
She always had.
That's why she would do little things, like bringing him water and painkillers after his drinking sprees. That night, she'd done the same thing she always did. Walked into his room quietly, placed the glass of water and the Advil on his bedside table, ready to slip out without a word. But this time, Adam surprisingly woke up. He was sitting up, his dark eyes fixed on her in a way that made her heart race. He looked drunk, yes, but also vulnerable. And when she turned to leave, his voice stopped her.
Soft. Low.
Pleading. Before she knew it, he was standing in front of her. He wasn't forceful. He wasn't rough. He didn't lash out, didn't yell, the way she'd always feared he might. Instead, his touch was gentle. his movements hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if this was real. And Naomi could have stopped him. She knew she should have. He was drunk and out of his mind. But she didn't. Because after 3 years of being his wife in name only, the man she had secretly loved finally looked at her, finally touched her, and the emotions she'd buried so deep came flooding back. So she gave in. And when it was over, when the haze lifted and reality crashed down on her, guilt consumed her. She ran out of his room, shut herself away, and cried until there were no tears left. The next morning, she couldn't even face him. She was sure he would remember, sure he would confront her. But he never did. He said nothing. And Naomi didn't know if it was because he'd forgotten or because he was pretending it hadn't happened. Then she found out she was pregnant. Everything changed after that. Rebecca had been pushing for a divorce for months, and Naomi had resisted. Not because there was love between them, but because Adam had never asked her for one. It had always been his mother, his sister, and his alleged girlfriend who did the talking. But once she knew she was carrying his child, she realized she had no choice. Staying married would only invite more questions. She couldn't explain the pregnancy without exposing what had happened, and she wasn't ready for that. She also didn't want to raise her child in such a toxic environment. So she left. She signed the divorce papers and walked away, determined to raise her child in peace.
But now,
Adam was here. And from the way he spoke, from the guilt in his eyes, Naomi realized something else. He really didn't remember. He didn't know. And maybe, in his own way, he was carrying guilt too. Guilt for something he couldn't even recall. She promised herself that she would tell him the truth.
but not now.
Not yet. For now, it was better this way. Better if they didn't talk about it.